one of the things that I know you've written about on salespeople is that they have just how they're compensated. And I think like all of us, at least who have hired salespeople, have this kind of way of designing compensation and changing the comp and changing the weights and stuff. But you gave in your TED talk, you kind of challenged the conventional wisdom about motivation and financial incentives. Can you kind of break down like how motivation actually works?
Yeah. So it's complicated. It's nuanced here.
Yeah.
So it's not so much about there's a head fake here of sorts in that it's not so much about the financial part of it. It has to do in some ways with the construction of the reward itself. There's a certain kind of reward that we use in organizations, a mainstay of sales compensation, which psychologists call a controlling contingent reward. I call it an if-then reward. If you do this, then you get that. If you do this, then you get that. What 60 years of science now tells us is that if-then rewards are pretty good for simple tasks with short time horizons, but they're less good for complex tasks with longer time horizons. And so as sales becomes less transactional, as sales becomes, especially in B2B, where the sales cycle can be very, very long, where the deal itself is fairly complicated, where you're operating as a manager. When we don't pay management consultants commission, and so
I think BCG consultants clearly do get a commission. Right, from their sales. Like, I mean, they
get it. That's a fair point. That's a fair point. They get a bonus.
Yeah.
They get a bonus in part based on total
their book of sales.
On the billings that they have for that year. Fair point. So what I'm saying is that instead of automatically assuming that the way to motivate salespeople is simply to increase the size of the bonus, increase the dial down the base comp, dial up the variable comp. I think that's a mistake. I think the more you have high stakes contingent rewards, the more people are going to think short term and risk take the low road. And so now that said, I am not against I don't think the evidence says that we should be against variable comp of any kind. I think what it says for most jobs, including sales, is I think one should pay a healthy base salary. That is, there's a tendency to say the only way that you can get salespeople to sell is if they're hungry. So we're going to pay them a limited base salary so they can't feed their family unless they bring stuff in. I think first of all, hiring great people. That to me, those are the first three steps: hire great people, hire great people, hire great people, pay a healthy base salary, and then offer variable comp that is connected to measures that matter and that aren't super complicated. One of the things that I think companies don't factor in with a lot of these very, very complicated compensation schemes that fuel the book of business of compensation consultants is how much time they spend designing the comp scheme, administering the comp scheme, litigating disputes within the comp. It's like that's an extra carrying cost of these kinds of complicated. So I like simple, connected to measures that matter.
But I imagine like all these people get paid, where a big portion of their compensation is a bonus, which could be an executive, which is getting like stock-based kind of comp or something, or like anyone who works for a financial institution, which could be like a hedge fund portfolio manager or investment banker or something like that. Like you're saying, for all of those, like we should dial up the more guaranteed comp and dial down the variable for them, or how should we be thinking about it? Yeah.
It depends, because it depends on where you're starting at. I mean, a lot of the variable comp, a lot of the bonuses. Okay, let's take a hedge fund, or excuse me. let's take a hedge fund or any kind of one reason that hedge funds go up is because the overall market goes up.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like, so it's like, it'd be like giving people a bonus for the sun for a sunny day rather than a cloudy day. Okay.
Yeah.
So you have to think about how much is the individual contribution to that gain, how much of it is simply being in the system. What I want to do is, what my view is, like, hire great people, pay them well, pay them fairly, and use variable comp, but in very simple measures for measures that matter. For instance, like you go back to the wealth managers. I mean, they're getting a portion of, they get a fee for And so it seems to be pretty well aligned that if the value of your portfolio goes up, their compensation goes up.
Yeah.
That seems to be reasonably fair. What we want to try to do here, though, is like we're dealing with we're chasing a phantom in a way, or we're moving toward we can it's an asymptotic. There is no perfect compensation scheme. No matter what compensation scheme you have, someone will figure out a way to game it, and there will be some element of it that is unfair. And so, for me, again, I keep coming back to the idea of focusing on hiring great people. I think one of the things you see, particularly with sales, is the idea that anybody can do it. And therefore, we just hire somebody and an extroverted ex-athlete. And then
Right.
we put them in, because our compensation scheme is so carefully calibrated, we can deposit them in that compensation scheme, and we're going to get the outputs that we want. And that's foolish. Hire great people, pay them well, pay them fairly, and use variable compensation in a simple way, so that it's fair. If I sell more than you, I deserve more money than you.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things you see, forgive me, this is not going to be an Esperanto style rant, but it's going to. But if you look at I think one of the things that pisses people off is not so much in startup companies, privately held companies, but in public companies. You have CEOs who come in and do a demonstrably terrible job.
Yeah.
And get paid a huge amount of money. And so if they do a very good job, they get paid an insane amount of money.
But isn't that clearly just the shareholders' fault? Like, they could get rid of the CEO.
Absolutely, it's the compensation committees. It's the compensation committees.
There's obviously the board might be captured. Exactly. BlackRock and Vanguard may not care because they're just betting on the S&P 500 or whatever. Like, if someone was doing demonstrably bad job, I know it's like a private equity owned thing, that they would get rid of the CEO. Like, they wouldn't keep that person around. But in a public company where you have these shareholders with diffuse power, maybe no shareholder has more than a few percentage of the thing. Like, they just keep around these low performers.
It's a governance problem, but my view, absolutely. But it also can metastasize. Give you an example. GE, Jeff Immelt. Jeff Immelt was not a good CEO.
No,
right?
Clearly
by any
not.
measure.
Yeah.
By any measure.
Yeah.
And he made hundreds of millions of dollars. And meanwhile, General GE spun stuff out, spun it back together again, spun it out again, and thousands of people lost their job. That's not good for the integrity, for the well-being of the people in that company.
Yeah. Many people had G in their pension, and all this other types of things, and so
there's one guy who is so like right now, there is nobody out there complaining that Jensen Huang is getting paid too much money.
Correct.
Because NVIDIA has gone up, 87,000% in the last 24 hours.
Completely. I don't know what. I don't know how he gets paid, but my guess is like 99% of his wealth is just owning basic common stock in NVIDIA, whether he was, and so he's completely aligned with the success of the company.
I mean, you could pull his compensation package for some of these places. Their compensation package is beyond simply stock ownership.
I know, but I guess for him, it's just
for him, it's probably
the stocks got up so much. I'm sure it's like it's some of these people. I mean, there are plenty of CEOs where they get paid like $1 a year, and like a Warren Buffett type person, their comp is all in their stock.
Yeah,
some of them get more stock over time. Now, what do you think of like the Elon Musk kind of famous stock grant where he got these like very out of the money options in Tesla? Nobody thought they would hit when he got them, and then they hit. And then now, like, certain maybe minority of shareholders sue because of that. Like, how do you think about that? Like, was that motivating him? Was it not? Like,
I don't know. Who knows what the hell's motivating him? But to me, that seems fair. It's like
totally.
It seems totally. That seems totally fair to me. It's be like, hey, I went to a garage sale and bought a bunch of baseball cards no one thought were valuable, and it turned out they were really valuable.
Right.
And I was going to sell them. It's like, that's not. That's I really think, Auren, that we have in some ways an intuitive sense of fairness, and especially in the West sort of like the U.S. and to some extent Western Europe, it's basically we want the some correlation between impact and compensation. And when that is aligned, people are generally fine with that.
Yeah.
This is why I don't think that you're ever going to have. This is why this country has never really had any kind of like groundswell, grassroots, pitchfork coming after the enormously wealthy. Because I think in part because of the way that many people today have accumulated their wealth. If I'm using Google every day and the Google guys made a lot of money, it's like, all right, that's good. Hey, it's all right. They did something.
Yeah.
If Kevin Hart is making a huge amount of money and I've gone to like four of his shows and watch all of his movies, okay, good for Kevin Hart.
Yeah.
It's when
if Dan Pink is making all this money, I read all of his books. Well, good for Dan Pink.
Sure, exactly. He's totally rolling in Kevin Hart money. And so, but I think I really think that a lot of this comes down to fairness, and we see research on this about how people inside of firms evaluate fairness. What they do is they evaluate fairness in sort of two dimensions, internally and externally. And so, the best way to get somebody to quit, best way to get you to quit, is if you and I are in a company, we have the same job, and same level of experience, and you are demonstrably better, but I'm getting paid more.
Yeah,
you're going to quit.
No question quit immediately.
That. Yeah, and so because it's not fair,
right?
If we were paid,
if I'm getting overcompensated,
exactly.
If I'm getting, if compared to like everyone else in the world, but in this particular situation,
compared to everyone else in the world, no one gives a shit about anyone else in the world.
Correct,
no one is saying, "Oh my God, I'm being paid fairly because someone in Burkina Faso doing my job is going to get paid less." No one has ever said that.
But even in a scenario where like they're paying me $10 million a year to. And I'm shooting basketball hoops, and you're getting paid $15 million a year, but I'm better at shooting basketballs than you. I'm going to be like, I'm moving to another team to get paid more.
Exactly. Exactly. And also, so you compare it internally, but you also compare it externally. So what is the going rate for a point guard in the NBA? And now again, the tricky thing about the NBA is that it has a salary cap. So that
and the tricky thing is that all the salaries are public.
Well, I think that's the really interesting thing. I think that pro sports pro sports is different because some of the leagues have salary caps, and also the compensation is determined in part by collective bargaining agreements.
Yeah.
So it's not
strong
like it's not like the labor markets in other kinds of things. But I do think that pro sports are a possible counter argument to people who fear this move towards salary transparency, where you can see the salary of anybody in your company.
Yeah.
And so because what you have is you have that two people sitting on a bench, two people on the same team in an NBA very small team, 12, 13 players, and everybody's salary, and they're big differences.
But in difference though, in like, first of all, there's only like 12 players a team or so in the NBA, and it's very clear. We can argue who's better, Steph Curry or LeBron James or something, but like, and that's a great fun argument. But there's very clear differences, like that anybody could understand by just looking at their stats between like Steph Curry and the number like 300 player, right? Like you could just look at the stat, you could like very clearly understand, and you also know like who's drawing like more fans to come watch the game, and like all those things are just like well known and very, very easy to quantify. Whereas like in a company, it's like that. And again, it's not perfect because even in the team, they have that glue guy who's like bringing everyone together and their stats aren't so good, but without them, but even there, you can look like points per minute when them on the field, points per minute when they're not. And you could start to try to understand. And there's so many great analytics. They just don't have those like in General Electric or something.
No, at least not yet.